everybody, and thank you for joining another Pilates Hour, talking about the kneeling cat exercises. And I'm joining you today from London. I'm sure my mic probably didn't pick it up, but I was just listening to the bells at St. Paul's. So I'm here for Pilates on Tour, going to be teaching this weekend. And where we're staying is really close to St. Paul's, and it's such a lovely sound to hear the bells every quarter hour. So please, yes, I see Ksenia has already started it. Oh, there's Lisa. So you guys know what to do. Please write in the chat where you're joining from. We love to see that. Paris, great. California, Virginia. Oh, another Greece. Len, hey Len. Keep going, keep going. I love to see where everybody's coming in from. I do go back and look at it because sometimes they come in so quickly that we we can't see. So it's great to see them here. So yeah, I think let's get started and hope you enjoy. And I will come back at the end to wrap up.
Thanks again for joining this week's Pilates Hour. I'm really excited to get in to talk about the kneeling cat exercises. And as you know, we have them both on the trapeze table and on the chair. And I really like them because they are intricate. And some would say, oh, they're very much, as we talk about, full body or movement integration, which they certainly are. There's a lot of different things going on. And at the same time, they can be kind of okay for people, right? They're not so advanced. It just takes a little bit of planning ahead of time to make sure that we have the right people doing them and the right variations. And how do you choose between the trap table and the chair? I've heard many different people say, oh, the trap table is so much easier for me. And turn around and the same number of people will say, oh, I love the chair. The chair is so much easier for me. So I think it's important, just as we're teaching and a way of thinking about exercises in general, is it's not so much what's easy for us as teachers, right? It's what is the person going to experience? What types of things do they have going for them? Maybe they have more mobility or better control, or they have less mobility or less control. And then we can start to choose, do we want to do this on the trapeze table or do we want to do this on the chair? So those would be some things to start thinking about and start to collect your questions. As we're doing this, I will be answering questions as we go along. So put your questions into the Q&A. And if you just have a comment or something, you can always put that into the chat. And that helps us out when I'm answering questions. So thinking about the chair, as we're doing it on the chair, there is a vertical position that we start in. And I remember, you guys know that I like to do a little bit of myth busting along the way, just in the sense that, are we really listening to what we say? Are we really listening to what our beliefs are? And are they still really valid? Or maybe it's not so valid anymore. And so I heard teachers long ago when I was first learning the kneeling cat on the chair, is that you start vertical and you keep your thighs vertical until your hands get onto the chair. And I said, yep, that's great. I'm ready to do that. And quickly realized that if I did that without changing anything, I was going to fall over onto my head, right? There's no way I could do that movement without changing something. So one thing that does make a difference, and I think sometimes we aren't always aware because we have our apparatus that we're used to, and we're not always thinking about, what a different piece of apparatus might give us, or a different manufacturer, or a different style. Remember, on the more original chair, the seat of the chair, the top of it, and where the pedals came, very close together. Now on some of the chairs, the pedal height is lower, and depending on if you set your springs up high or you set your springs low, it could even be a little bit lower. So that's going to make a difference in when I get support. As I'm rolling down and I'm going to put my hands onto the chair pedals, I'm not going to get as much support if the springs are set low or if I'm using maybe a combo chair versus an exo chair or a window chair. So just think about that. The other part is somebody holding my feet, right? Or is there a strap or something that's on my feet? And maybe this could be possible if you were to move your chair right up against the end of your trap table. Then you could have the cotton strap that goes around the trap table, and you could put your feet under that and then have a little bit of success keeping the thigh upright as you're doing it. That said, sometimes that's a lot of maneuvering around, and do as much of the roll down, keeping yourself as vertical as you can. Sit back a little bit until you can get your hands onto the pedals, and then bring yourself and your thighs more back up to a vertical position. So that would be how I would approach it. And if we're thinking about the differences between these two exercises, we're still in both attempting to get to or approaching full shoulder flexion. So as I'm on the chair or as I'm on the trap table, eventually I'm going to get to where I'm in a pretty fully flexed position of my shoulder. That's a place where now the orientation to gravity really matters. And we're going to look at both of these. So we'll do some on the trap table and then I'll do some on the chair so you can see it, especially if you're not as familiar with these exercises. You don't teach them as much or you don't do them yourself. Maybe you don't have a chair and you're only doing it on the trap table. So lots of different variations out there of apparatus that we have and what we can use and what we should be thinking of. So if we go now to the trap table, which is where we're going to start, it's a much more horizontal position. So the chair is a little bit more on a downward diagonal, and the body now on the trap table is a little bit more horizontal. That means that when I approach this shoulder flexion piece, my whole body is kind of relying on not only where my pelvis is sitting over my knees, right, and over the femur, but also how much mobility do I have at my shoulder and how much control of that mobility do I have? I may have a lot of mobility, but once I'm now faced with gravity pulling my body down, I may not have the control or I may not have access to the control, which is a little bit different, to sustain me in that position. So when I get onto the trap table, I'll show some different variations of things that we can start looking at of how to approach, or sometimes we'll use the word approximate. How can I get close to it, but maybe not with the same demand, right? The same demand of gravity pulling on my body or that load, or maybe the need for mobility. How can I get close to that without putting the body in too much undue stress? Right? We want to be able to, safely move in these positions, and that's just something to think about. If we're thinking about our screening, our Polestar screening, and you guys can be jotting down your notes on these too, is one of the tests that I'm always looking at is goalpost and prone shoulder flexion. So I want to know, can somebody get their arms to this position? Not even talking about control yet, but do they have the mobility both in the glenohumeral joint, right? So in the actual arm to shoulder socket, right? Do they have that mobility? And do they also have mobility around the tissues around the chest wall and also in the back, right? Think about the latissimus. It attaches it's one of the muscles that attaches your arm to your trunk. And if I don't have good mobility there, maybe I don't have good upward mobility of my shoulder blade, I don't have a lot of extensibility maybe in my pectoral muscles, maybe my day looks like this and I'm really rounded, that's going to affect my ability to get my arms all the way up. Then it becomes other muscles that are going to maybe substitute, like my traps or my jaw even. Sometimes when we're in those positions, just to try to hold on and find some control. So that's one of the first things I'm looking at in this Polestar screening: goalpost and prone shoulder flexion. And maybe I want to even just look at a plain old armor. What happens when somebody moves their arms overhead like this? What happens in their whole body? And then I also think about the push down part of it, right? So I'm kneeling, and we'll see this, I'll demonstrate in a second, and I push the bar forward and down. I could also bring the bar forward and up. I could also bring the bar out and down this way, and that really starts to bring me into exercises like the supine scapular series on the trap table. So long before I might get somebody up into this kneeling position, I'm going to be looking at them lying down. When they take the bar overhead, how does that look? Can they get to this position with ease? And then how does it look as they come back up with more of the wide elbow position? So this looks a lot more like goalpost. It also looks like scarecrow, right? How is somebody's ability to have external rotation at this point to go? And then how do they do if you bring the arms more parallel to one another? Can they move their arms this direction and have good control? And again, when they get here, does something like this happen? Or can they keep the width, right? The shoulder blades, and try this as you're watching, just take your arms overhead in a comfortable position. You should be able to elevate your shoulder blades and gently depress them while your arms are overhead. And if this doesn't feel so comfortable, right, we need to start looking at why. One of the things I find is that people move their shoulders toward their neck. So we don't want to encroach on the neck this way. I want to find some space here so that as I'm reaching up and down, it's as if my whole shoulder is just going to follow my arm as opposed to coming in toward my neck, because that amount of compression inward does not provide for good mobility of the shoulder. It doesn't provide for good alignment. And so we need to be able to figure that out. So what are all of these preparatory exercises that you can start to use, thinking ahead to, yeah, someday my client is going to be doing kneeling cat, and are all the parts in place for that? So that's a really important piece to it. So again, look at arm arcs, look at your screening tests, and think about some of the more basic arm movement, shoulder movement that you can use to make sure that they not only have the mobility, they have the awareness, and they have the control. And it's a balance of when is their mobility and when is their control, because they both exist. And it's like a kind of like a volume or a dimmer switch, right? Some things you need more control, a little bit less mobility. Some things you need more mobility and a little bit less control. And it has that kind of sliding on and sliding off feeling. So just thinking about that in terms of how we get the shoulder ready for it. Other things I might look at too, just general strength and mobility, is something like the push-up, right? So it's different in that we're not going overhead, but how does somebody manage their body when they're doing their push-up? Do they have the capacity to really bend and move at the elbow and at the shoulder? That's an important piece too, just to see if that exists for them. And they should be working on that anyway in the movement. And it is, in essence, a plank. So as you're getting into the roll forward and the stretch long, your body's in a plank. Your hips aren't, your legs aren't, but your body is in a plank. So then that leads me into hip mobility. It's really important that we have hip mobility, because my femur is going to be the piece that stays, and my pelvis is going to move over the top of it. So hopefully, as someone is kneeling, they can get their body in neutral, right? The relationship of their pelvis to their thighs, but also their torso. How does their pelvis relate to their torso, or vice versa? So we'll start there. We start our roll down. And then this is the place where I find that people, again, it's when the springs maybe aren't set quite right. We'll talk about what the springs are and some other modifications. You can probably see the TheraBand that I have there. That control piece is maybe missing a little bit, or maybe they don't sense control. Feels like maybe the bar is gonna move away from them, and every muscle starts to get a little bit more involved. So in kneeling and thinking about the hip mobility piece, maybe the glutes are a little overactive. Maybe Some of the inner thigh muscles are kind of holding, or even the abdominal muscles are contracting in a short way that's not allowing for the body to open. This is a really important place to remind people, again, probably not teaching them at this point, they should know it already, but remind them of the bone rhythms. So as the pelvis tilts over the top of the femur, the sit bone's relatively, and the pelvis is widening in the back and narrowing in the front. So you could think about the pubic bones more kind of gently coming together, or you could think of the back of the pelvis widening apart. And at the same time, remember, if I'm just on this side, right, and I'm moving this way, counter to that, my thigh is going to be spiraling the opposite way. Right? That's just our bone rhythms that you've heard us talk about. Again, thanking Eric Franklin for kind of putting that together as an image of what's already happening, the arthrokinematics of the joints, what's already happening in there, and can we use our cueing to facilitate that if it's not happening, right? If it's already happening, we don't need to say anything. But thinking about that in the pelvis. So how is that? So I'm really curious how somebody does with their squat. At least a half squat, if not going into a full squat, because I really want to see how is their hip flexion mobility. Can they do that? So even looking at that with assistance, maybe you're going to use the long, heavy leg springs and do some assisted squats to get ready for this. Knee stretches, all of the quadruped exercises on the reformer. Wonderful way to make sure that somebody has the appropriate mobility in their hip joint. And really in those cases, we're looking at mobility. Control in a sense of keeping the movement smooth, but we don't have to, have so much control at the hip joint because we really want mobility there. So reverse abdominals, knee stretch. We teach the quadruped exercise where the hands are on the frame, knees are on the carriage, that quadruped on the reformer. All of those are going to help give you an idea of, does somebody have the right mechanics, right? Do they have the mobility, the right alignment, the right even thought of it, right? Because maybe how they're thinking, their belief of the movement might work to their advantage and it might work, away from them. So just those things as well as we're going into it. Might be interesting, even though we're not looking at hip internal and external rotation, but maybe it's interesting to go into the Z-sit on both sides and just see, maybe not so concerned with the side leg and internal rotation, but how is the front leg? Can the front leg be turned out in this position and the person sit fairly vertical, right? That might give you a clue combined with some of the other tests of, yeah, I think this person has appropriate mobility, or gosh, they don't for some reason. And then you can work on that again in preparation for the exercise. And then of course we need spine mobility and really thinking about how we're describing a roll down. Different than a roll up, even though the mechanics of it as these parts are staying steady and these parts are moving are kind of the same. But the muscle activation to create the movement is very different. When people say, I want to work my abdominals, right? And you know that we don't do a lot of muscle cueing, but we know that for a roll up, my rectus abdominis is working, right? It is the muscle, one of the main ones that's going to help me to roll up. I don't need that if I'm doing a standing roll down, which is this exercise on the trap table and on the chair, because now gravity is assisting me in my roll down, and my back extensor muscles are really now the parts that are allowing me to move smoothly. So my spine extensors, some of the hip muscles, if I was fully standing, it would start to involve my hamstrings. And those muscles are slowing me down and controlling the movement as I roll down. So in these two exercises, not necessary at all. If you were going to cue a muscle, which we really, again, talk about the ineffectiveness of that, but if you needed to, this would not be the time because the movement is already going to happen, right? So we don't need to cue the abdominals to work. We do need to cue the smoothness, and that might be something where your cues are going to come in really handy of slowly do this, smoothly do this. Feel like you're peeling against, away from standing against the wall or certain things like that. So that would help with the mobility. In our screening, I'm going to look at the roll up and the roll down to see how they do there. I might sneak in a bridge, right? Not really part of our smaller screening, but it is part of our Polestar assessment tool. So those evaluation tests. And I might look at a bridge. How do they do with the bridge? How do they do with just kind of a basic chest lift, right? It's going to be really interesting if I'm looking at chest lift to see how they roll down and they don't have much mobility there. I'm going to make sure that I'm working on that ahead of time. Otherwise, it's just going to kind of hinge and go out, and they won't have the control or the mobility there. So I might look at that as well. And then I'm really interested in looking at the quadruped, cat and horse, or whatever the different ways that people call the exercise, but quadruped, spine extension, spine flexion. And you've probably heard me talk again about just slow down moving where we already move a lot. So if I'm in quadruped and I'm going into the spine flexion part of it, we often see people do a lot of movement in their rib cage, their thoracic spine, because we can. And it's a little harder to get some of the movement in your lumbar spine or the low part of your thoracic spine. So we just kind of avoid it, right? We're not even aware that we're doing it. Right? It's not conscious. We're thinking in our minds, and this is where that sense of alignment comes in, not in our body, but our body and our mind. So are we perceiving what we're doing accurately? Or if we looked at ourselves, I grab my phone and I shoot a little video of me doing a movement like cat and horse, would I really be moving at the places that I want to be moving? And when working with more novice teachers, people who are just going through their teacher training, and also with clients, is what are we looking for as teachers? So can I get my curve of my spine to be pretty evenly distributed from top to bottom in either of the directions, right? So if I'm going into an extension curve, is it really biased toward my lumbar spine and not much happening in my thoracic spine? So be sure you're looking at those things. Grab your phone, check it out, see what it is. And it is often different than what we think is going on inside of our bodies. So I'd want to make sure that is pretty clear too, because that tells me they have movement all the way through their spine and they have available movement there, because I might want to go into a variation that takes me from neutral into extension. And can I find that under the load of gravity pulling down on my body, or am I not so accurate with that? Because the kneeling cat kind of is quadruped, right? You're on your knees, your arms are out. They're much farther forward than we would do if we were having our hands on the mat, but you can mimic that. You don't have to push the bar quite so far forward. So just some ideas there of trying to start connecting the dots of all the different options. So let me jump up onto the trap table now and show a few of the variations, and also start to put it in perspective of the whole sense of movement. One of those is the seated push through. So that's an exercise that most everybody is familiar with. And that's just seated cat, right? We have seated cat, kneeling cat, standing cat, and how can we link those together? And it's not always a straight progression, right? Sometimes seated is easier for people. Sometimes seated, because they don't have a very good long sit, is the least available to them and much easier to do it in standing. So kind of have to think about what is the person coming with and what do you want to accomplish in the movement. So we might be looking at something around the shoulder. For a different client, you might be looking at hip mobility. And a different client, you might be looking at the flow of their movement. How do they move from kneeling to kind of quadruped-ish back up to kneeling? So lots of different reasons why you might be doing the movement. All right, so let's get going on to the equipment. I've put a TheraBand here. You can probably see it, or a resistance band. And I use this as a stopper. If your trap table, and some trap tables have this and some don't, some have the bar that goes between, we sometimes refer to it as the fourth bar, goes between there. A lot of the wooden push-through bars or tower bars have that piece already built in. And you know that the spring then either stops on the bar or this part of the bar stops on there and goes through that way. And you've got a break, right? You've got a natural stopping point that if somebody lost control and was going way out, but they couldn't control it, if this TheraBand wasn't here or the bar wasn't there, they might just keep going and go too far, not to be able to control the motion of the shoulder. So if you're just starting with somebody and you want to have, again, like a natural kind of a break, so they don't go too far, they also feel more confident this way, put a band there or put the bar in, and it really will, it will help the whole thing. So some options for, again, if you're going to do it sitting, a lot of people not able to do their long sit. So if it's possible, some people have the soft tissue mobility to sit this way, some don't, but you could start your push through or your kneeling cat from this position. So you can get out and back up. And this is a wonderful way to work on hip mobility if somebody needed it, right? And I think of this as a preparation for something like the hip opener or the side standing leg press on the chair, working up to doing side lunge on the chair and maybe the side step down, or often called going upside. A lot of people don't have this mobility. If they need to have it for their activities, this might be a place where you could start. But again, some people, this is not an easy position, and this actually might be preferable. So as we move up to kneeling, now we can again start to look at some of the motions here that I talked about of the arm. Definitely you can press up a little bit higher, and you could even eventually with somebody get into a little bit of a lean. So they're mimicking a plank again, mimicking some load at the shoulder that they have to control, but in a position that's a little bit easier, right, than the stresses of gravity pulling down. So from the kneeling position, starting to move through the head, and here's where your chest lift is so important. My very talkative springs today. So in the chest lift, right, or the curl, make sure that you're keeping the sense of having the hand behind the head and the head pressed up into the hand. So that's an important piece that's often missing. Right away, I do chin to chest because I was told do chin to chest, right? We cue that, but people take it a little bit much, and then it starts to look like this, and then it starts to look like that. And there's really nothing happening in the spine. So if you keep the sense of pressing the head back and then curling forward, people will often be able to access the mobility in their rib cage a little bit better. Maybe they just get to here and they come back up. Gradually over time, allowing people to go farther and farther, right? And maybe I can't really go any farther with this in my shoulders, but I can start to move my spine into neutral and then come back up. And then this starts to look not unlike the up stretch exercise on the reformer. So rolling the body one way and rolling the body back up. So it's again a familiar pattern that maybe somebody has done, and they now can transfer that feeling to here or vice versa. Maybe you start here and you go on to the reformer. One of the things that I've been kind of playing around with recently is hand placement. And if you've gone through our training, you've noticed that the hands are crossed to go into rotation. And I thought, well, that's so nice because we're pulling back on the bar and pushing against the bar which doesn't make it feel like it's going to go out so fast. And that's what I've had clients tell me before. It's like, wow, it just feels like the bar is going to go really fast away from me. So in that case, do the forward facing one, not rotation, and practice with your arms crossed. If you're where your trap table is right now, you can try that. And I just have my hands in the center, not necessary for the arms to be fully straight, but lengthened. And then as I roll forward with my bottom hand that's palm up, I'm able to pull back a little bit, and I'm able to push with the top hand that's palm down. So as I'm going, I could stop myself just about anywhere. And again, it's not necessary that the arms are fully straightened, but lengthened, yes. And maybe I can actually get out into this space and come back up with the feeling of a little bit more control until I can do it the more traditional way of rolling and getting out to here, where now my shoulder extensors, right? I'm going towards shoulder flexion, but my shoulder extensors, because I'm pressing down into the bar, are quite active. And then I can come back up. Right? So that's the feeling of support through the body that we need, the shoulder girdle to the torso. So that's one of the things to take a look at on that. So practice that with the hands crossed and see what you think about it. It's not for everybody. Certain people are going to have some shoulder limitations that just, this isn't going to feel comfortable, but take a look at it and see what you think about that, because I kind of like that one as well. Now I have a variation with a ball, and this is where it's nice to have a student and a teacher. The teacher can keep the ball in place, but you'll get the idea. And this is, again, familiar to some of you because you've done your swan this way. When somebody can't do the full swan coming overhead and back, then this is a tool that we use to make it a little bit more available. So as you're here, you can see that already now I'm in the position, and I could even straighten my legs a little bit and start to approach more shoulder flexion, but the ball is supporting me. So I might even start just here with somebody in a quadruped position, going out, maybe not going into full shoulder flexion first, but then exploring that. So again, I'm approximating, I'm getting close to the position that I would use, but without all of the demand. So we're really playing with load. We're playing with, can I get to the position? If I have some assistance, can I get there, and do I have the mobility? Then I can start gradually taking away assistance like the ball until I can do it on my own independently. But even as a warm up for somebody to just start to, oh yeah, this is what this feels like. This is the position I'm going to be in. That might be kind of nice. And you can have the ball here if you need to as a teacher, hold it, or sometimes you can put a ring down or something and allow them to go through the whole thing. So I can start upright. I'm not getting any help here until I eventually get on the ball and then back up. So great variation to just start to explore the movement itself, explore the potential, and start to gradually load the tissues, the demand, until somebody can be independent. So that is kneeling cat. Let me see if I want to see any other things. Standing. Yes. So we had seated push through. Then we had kneeling push through. Now we can go to standing push through. And I really like the standing push through. Again, for many people, it's actually more accessible. Sometimes we think, oh, standing should always be at the end. You can't do something standing in the middle of a session. And that's just not true. We want to meet the client where they are. And so standing might be the most accessible position for somebody. So I typically don't use a spring, although you could. I just feel like there's not really a huge need for it. I can still practice my roll down. I'm still being conscientious, not to let my pelvis move too soon in the movement. And I can start to go out. I can get into this lengthened position. I can come back, so I can go as far as I want into it or not. As the teacher, I might be pulling back and stopping the bar, so the person is not going quite so far, or I can just let them go for it. And I can also, depending on if I'm standing closer or standing farther back, if I'm way back, I don't want to go too much out of the shot. If I'm way back, now it's going to start to be more horizontal. So now I'm in, again, the same position that I would be if I was kneeling, but with less load, similar to what was just done on the ball. If you wanted to push up, you wanted to make it look more like the seated push through, come in a little bit closer. And now a lot of the motion is going to be up here. And I can, kind of play around with and see where is my control? Where can I change my shoulder alignment that makes my shoulder either feel a little bit stronger relatively, like I can manage it better, or I can adjust if it's uncomfortable. So you can do those things when there's not so much load just pulling you down. So some options there. And then of course you can get fancy here. You can still do the cross hand and where we are, and I'll try to face so you can see. So with my top arm, as I'm pushing forward, if I'm going to go into rotation, you're going to turn in the direction of where the bottom arm is, right? Or turn toward the top arm if you're thinking about the side. So this arm is kind of traveling that way. I kind of feel like my body's going to go with it. Or with the top arm, I can see it right there, and I'm going to turn with it as I go to look either under, or maybe I don't have the control to go under my arm this way, but I do have the control to stay up here, right? So the movement doesn't have to go into the full shoulder flexion. I could manage that as I'm able to. And you can do that same thing here in standing. I've seen it done seated on a ball. There's lots of variations that kind of link seated push through, supine arm series, the scapular series, all of these things with the kneeling cat. So hopefully that's given you some ideas. Now I'm going to switch equipment and we're going to take a look at kneeling cat and the difference now on the chair. All right, so we've had our equipment change and we're going to take a look at the kneeling cat now on the chair. And as I mentioned, it's a little less horizontal. It's a little bit more on a downward diagonal. And one of the things that I experienced early on, again, learning this, is that people set the springs really light, which might be great for somebody who already knows how to do the movement. They've managed to figure out where to put their body weight. They have the mobility, they have the control. But for a beginner, kneeling really tall on this small surface and trying to get your hands to the pedals that are going to support you seems almost like a daunting task. It's really, for a lot of people, off-putting. It doesn't make them feel secure. And then we are a little bit annoyed as teachers, like, why do you keep letting your hips go back? Well, it's because the springs aren't set in a way that it's actually going to support the person's body weight. Even if it's just for a few repetitions, you can always make the spring setting a little bit lighter. But remember, again, in a way of setting it up so the client really feels secure and successful, we have to think about meeting them where they are, offering sometimes more support, approximating the movement, right? That idea of doing it, maybe not in the final way, but in a way that people can start to understand it in their bodies with ease, right? So again, we're managing load. You've heard Brent talk about this a lot in his webinars, is can we manage the load in a way that restores or gives people access to the mobility that they have? If they don't have mobility, that's a different story. Then we need to maybe refer out. I would, as a Pilates teacher, I'd refer out to a physical therapist maybe. But if they have the mobility, but they can't manage it, this is one way that we can manage it, by giving more assistance to the client, right? So set your springs up heavy, and it really requires your body weight to shift out to actually depress the pedals. And that's good because that's the position we want people to be in. Now you'll see I have another band that I'm using, and I've intentionally left the handles on. Not really to use them, but it does make people feel a little bit more secure. And I've tied a band. Here's the band here. And that is about where people's thighs are, the front part of their thigh, when they're going to start going into the motion. You have to tie it kind of tight, and you're not trying to put it there to keep them from falling forward, but it gives them a little bit of proprioception when you're saying, oh, you're leaning forward, you're leaning back. They can use this band for feedback to know where their thighs are vertical. So just something you can try out if you want. As I mentioned, and maybe somebody can do this, I certainly can. I can't keep my thighs vertical with nothing holding my feet and go all the way to the pedals. Maybe one of you can, but I can't. So again, it's the idea. And if we're going to take maybe the full choreography, I might have my arms all the way up. And I start again to do my chest lift. I could have my hands behind the head for chest lift. I could have my hands on my legs to do it, whatever feels comfortable. And then at a certain point, I'm going to have to let my weight shift back a little bit. And for a beginner, I wouldn't start all the way up here doing all of this part. I would just put my hands down on the chair itself and then walk my hands down to the pedals. And I'm not worried about my thighs being vertical right now. I just want somebody to get there feeling confident. Now I can shift my body weight out a little bit. And if the springs are heavy enough, and I have 2 of the heavy springs on the chair all the way up at the top. If you haven't tried it, you think I'm crazy, try it. You have to get your body weight out, but it's going to feel buoyant and supported. Now I can start to work on my thighs being vertical, right? I could sit back, or I could even lean a little too far forward. I don't want to do that too much because I want to end up on my head. Or I can just get to where I'm feeling the band against my thighs as I push down. Now, my arms, the line of my arms into my torso, it's more supportive than when my arms are out this way. Now I'm totally relying on my shoulder joint and my muscles there to hold me up. When I'm at the downward diagonal, now I can almost use my bones of my arms to support me. And I'm not having to use so much muscle work because my bones are aligned. The muscles are just helping me as the springs are. And then I begin to roll up. And here's the magic is stay with the thighs either touching the band, or if you have your hands there as a teacher. And now I'm working again on my pretty much the cat part, but I'm looking at cat and horse again, flexion extension, and I'm starting it from my pelvis and then my lower spine, and then eventually my upper spine and the pedals. So one of the cues that I'll often use for people straight away is leave the pedals where they are, right? Because we often do that and move in the thorax first. If you leave the pedals where they are, then you can move the pelvis first. And that's where you get that ripple feeling, like when you're doing upstretch or some sort of articulation that way. Just an idea. Talk about the timing of the equipment just as much as you talk about the timing of the body, because it makes a difference. Now, for fun, so we have the band here. Again, it's not going to support me. If I really go forward, I'm going to fall. But it's just, again, to give me some information. I've also done it where you use the dowel. Now, you could keep your chair dowel in and get another dowel from somewhere in your studio. Or, to make it a little bit more interesting, now we can use the split pedal because that's fun. That's fun to start exploring movement in this different orientation to gravity. And if I was someone who was prone to sitting back, right, and the dowel now is not being held onto the poles as I sit back, this is another way to give somebody feedback of, oh, wow, I didn't realize I was sitting back. And if they have to hold the dowel to the handles, again, it's one more layer of information that might be that piece, right? That aha moment, that piece of information that goes, oh, now I understand what you mean. So again, you just have to keep looking. Where can somebody have that? And this was something that I came up with because obviously if I sit back, the dowel is going to fall down. If you're doing it by yourself, you can't start from all the way up. You have to start forward. Otherwise, you can't get there. But now, again, I have a couple of different things happening. I have my legs really being held at that top position in the vertical, and I can start to move here. I also now have the opportunity to start to add in rotation, which a lot of people do. A lot of people have gone beyond the choreography that we've learned and started to add interest and add movement. I can definitely do all of my arm pumping, some of the washerwoman type movement. I can do it wide. I can do it narrow. I can do it reciprocal. All the while, I'm still getting the information here with the pole, with the dowel, of maintaining my hip alignment. So I'm going to set this down for a second and just do a little bit more choreography because I think it's interesting to explore the movement. Once you get into the split pedals and you want to start making it flow, you might need to decrease your spring just a little bit so you can bring it down. And you can, again, if you're used to doing it or you learned it with a light spring, certainly go back to that. And I'd be curious to know, is the client more successful or a different group of clients are more successful when you give them more support at first to boost their confidence? So just at some point, I'm sure we'll meet up in a conference or somewhere and you can let me know that. So now I can start to go into my movement again. I can sit hands on. And now I can again even add in some extension, some rippling, some rotation with a ripple, all of these motions, and a little bit less thinking about it and a little bit more feeling it and moving with it so that we're starting to get into more spontaneous movement. We need to learn the basics. We need to have some limits in a way to learn movement. And if we just open it up with a zillion possibilities right at the beginning, it's hard. It's hard for people to manage that. We need some limits. But then once somebody has it, it's also really nice to get back into spontaneous movement. So I even give my clients, just feel what it's like to rotate, feel what it's like to extend, feel what it's like to flex. Now you put it together. You do something with that. And it's amazing. You can see their whole expression, even like the color of their skin, like their pallor, right? It starts to change as they become independent movers. And you could do this with any exercise and become a little bit more spontaneous. And it really is a great teacher of, oh, wow, this type of motion comes pretty easily to me. This other kind of motion doesn't. And I might need to practice that a little bit more. Also, I thought I couldn't do this type of movement, but actually I can. So those positive experiences, those little shifts in belief, right? Because once you've changed that, their belief can't be, oh, I can't do this type of motion. And look for those opportunities in all of your teaching. Doesn't matter what exercise you're doing. It doesn't matter what movement form you're teaching. You might be doing yoga, gyrotonic, gyrokinesis, just general gym workout, calisthenics, whatever it is. Look for the opportunities that you can give somebody the information. Now, you can't just say, well, I know you can do it, so now you need to believe you can do it. That won't necessarily change their own internal belief. It might lead them in that direction that you have confidence that they can do something. But you can't just say that. You have to give them an experience where they actually do it, whatever it is, a movement position, a movement, something they thought they couldn't do. A lot of times it's their belief that they can't do it or the strategy in which they're doing it. And you can easily change that by adding more springs, adding fewer springs, changing a relationship to gravity. If it's a seated thing, do it lying down. If it's lying down, do it standing, do it kneeling, so that you figure out for that particular individual what speaks to them, right? Oh my gosh, I've done this so many times and I've never really been able to do it this way. And you made one little change and now I can do it. Like, isn't that interesting? Isn't that fun? So start looking for those if you're not already. Yes, we need to follow the forms and structures. And if we're doing a Pilates session, we really want to be doing Pilates movement. If we're saying that, if we're doing some sort of hybrid, as long as you're, truthful up front of what you're doing, I think it's fine to combine things, but I wouldn't combine things and then call it by one name. I would, be mindful of what it is that you're teaching. And so you can say that. There's a lot of discussion now of, can I do a hybrid class? Can I, should I only teach this or only teach that? And I think it just has to do with being honest about what the expectation is. And then clients are usually happy with any movement, right? They want to move. They want to move better. They want your help in moving better. So look for these little opportunities to take it out of its normal, do it, right? Sometimes in Polestar, we call that foreign to familiar environment, right? If somebody has a habit of doing something a certain way and you keep doing it in that same way, you're not as likely to make successful changes as if you can give them the same experience, a better experience in a different orientation to the gravity or to the apparatus or whatever. So look for those little places. And this is one of those pairings of exercises where seated push through, kneeling push through on the chair, standing push through, each one might have something that's needed for this particular client to really learn and understand. And then again, broaden it and have them do it in all different directions. If you're thinking about it, it kind of reminds me also, if we flipped it completely upside down, kind of reminds me almost of a teaser, right? I'm going to roll myself up through a chest lift and I'm going to flex my hips, right? And especially if I do it with my knees bent at tabletop, I'm almost in the same position. If you can imagine that, a tabletop teaser, if you flipped it upside down, you would be a kneeling cat on the chair. So again, just think of these ideas. It's where my mind goes. Maybe yours doesn't go that far, but I think it's really interesting to explore because then we have potentially better successes with our clients. So again, thank you so much for joining. I hope that this has been an interesting look. If there's time, we're going to keep answering some questions. Thank you again for joining, and we'll see you at the next webinar and Pilates Hour.
Thank you, everybody. And I did get some questions from people of, can you show this again? And like, if I can't, I'd love to. So one of the questions did come up about the handles on the chair and the TheraBand. I just tied a TheraBand around it. It's not too scientific on that one. I just tied it around in a knot and let the legs rest up against that a little bit. So hopefully that answered that question. And if there are any others, I'm just looking now in the chat, and sorry, I have a lot of background noise. Maybe you can hear it or not. Let me look in the chat really quick to see. All right, great. And any other Q&A? I'll stay on just for another minute if somebody's typing. Oh, there come a couple. Yep, great. So I'm going to read. Thanks, Deidre. Oh, haven't seen Deidre in a while. Thank you for coming. Valeria has a question. She was asking, I had said something and I wasn't quite sure what I had said about poles and dowels, and I probably used a couple of those words interchangeably. So I think I'm going to answer that one. I might just type that one in. I'm not sure. Let's see, maybe the dowel, do not move. Yeah, so I either was talking about, this was kneeling on the chair, and what often happens, I'm guessing on this a little bit because I don't know that I totally understand where I was what I was talking about, but just in the kneeling position on the chair, what we'd like to have happen on the return on the, so the person has pushed all the way down, they're about to come back up, just like in any other kind of a standing or kneeling roll up, we'd like the legs to stay and the pelvis to start to move. I know what it was. I just had to talk through it. So the pedals that my hands are on, I got it, Valeria, we got to the answer. Have the idea, it's not really going to happen, but have the idea that as the person is about to roll back up, that the pedals stay down. Obviously, the pedals have to come up with you and the springs are going to bring you back up. But if you can delay the pedals from lifting off of the bottom of the chair, then that will help you to get the pedals and not to sit back quickly. So that's it. Yes, pedals. I think we'll finish up. Thank you all for joining, and I was really happy that I was still able to do the webinar this week, even though I'm in London. Maybe I'll see some of you if you're coming to POT, and otherwise we will see you at the next Pilates hour. Thanks, everybody.